Hello again, my friends. I'm glad you could join me again. So last week we left off with the beginning of the classical period in music and the arrival of the Moravian Church in the Americas, 1750 to 1760. This week we'll move on to Mozart. And what can I possibly say about Mozart that has not been said already? One of the greatest composers, greatest geniuses ever to live. Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart, born January 27th, next week's his birthday. Happy birthday, Mozart. 1756 in Salzburg, modern-day Austria, which at the time was part of the Holy Roman Empire. His father, Leopold, also a musician, was a violinist and a Kapellmeister, a director of music for a court in Salzburg. Young Mozart, Wolfgang, by the time he was 5, is said to have been proficient in violin as well as the keyboard and had begun composing pieces on his own. So his father, recognizing the prodigy that was his son, took him on a tour of Europe playing concerts. Anywhere he could play, kings, queens, dukes, all over Europe, Mozart would play concerts. He was a great hit with the audiences. They recognized that this was a genius that didn't come along every day. Not only did he play well, but he also improvised extremely well. He had a photographic memory of music and showed this off. People would make up a piece on the spot, and young Amadeus would play it back for them. So a photographic memory for music. And much of Mozart's childhood was spent playing concerts and touring. By the time he was a late teen, he had settled with again, like his father, in Salzburg and became a court musician. Now, the drawback to being a court musician is that you're bound to be at the court, which meant if someone offered you a position for a month in another country, on a tour, playing a concert somewhere else for a lot of money, you had to turn that down because you were bound to play only for the court that had hired you. So by the time Mozart was young 20s, he had had his fill of being beholden to one court. So he either quit or was fired. And we're not sure which, but probably a good combination of both. Well, with his newfound freedom, he wound up in Vienna, which was the center of the music scene at the time and remains so today. While in Vienna, he took another position as a court musician and made most of his living from being a court musician the rest of his life. He began composing in earnest in Vienna. One of the reasons that we view him as such a genius of music is that everything he composed was brilliant. He wrote piano sonatas, which still were the simpler form, not like Beethoven wrote, but a smaller, shorter form, much like Haydn's music. He wrote piano concertos, which had orchestral accompaniments, but still had the piano as a solo instrument. He wrote violin concertos. He wrote a clarinet concerto. He wrote string quartet. He wrote string quintet music. He wrote oratorios. He wrote cantatas. He wrote more motets. He wrote symphonies. He wrote opera. And all of them were brilliant. He was simply a genius composer. He composed 41 symphonies in his life, and these symphonies, as we talked about Haydn, the symphonies that Mozart wrote and composed began, the early symphonies were similar to Haydn, shorter. By the time he got to his latter symphonies, the 41st symphony was never completed, but by the time he was writing the 39th symphony and 40th, these were very complex, long, very involved symphonies, much like we know of symphonies today. He also was known as an opera composer, and his choice was to compose opera. There was tremendous desire for opera. It was very sellable. The general public ate it up. There was a lot of respect for opera composers. And the thing that Mozart did well is he wrote not only comedy operas like Don Giovanni, Così fan tutti, The Marriage of Figaro, he also wrote serious opera such as The Magic Flute. Now, about him personally, there's been a lot of talk about the eccentricities of Mozart, and a lot of this goes back to, we know Mozart through the movie Amadeus. Well, Amadeus came from a play by Peter Schaffer, and for the most part, a lot of the characteristics are based on reality, but the mystery that was included in Amadeus, the mysterious death, not really that mysterious. He did die at age 35 from an illness. We still don't know what he died from. Was it poisoning? Probably not. There have been 1,000 different diagnoses offered for what Mozart died from, but the truth is we don't know what he died from. He was buried in a common grave, but when we use the term common, the only choices that you had for a grave at the time were royalty, pauper, or common. So he was not a pauper, he was not royalty, so he was buried in a common grave, but so were most people. As far as the weather on his death, totally fabricated. Peter Schaffer just made up a great deal of the story about Salieri poisoning Mozart. Salieri actually had a great deal of respect for Mozart. They were contemporaries. So a lot of the characteristics that we know of Mozart come from the movie, not necessarily history. Part of the movie that is accurate, however, is Mozart had a raucous, bawdy sense of humor. And he wrote many letters demonstrating this bawdiness that he had. And he would write music pieces with just filthy imagery of body functions, and he thought that this was the funniest things that in the world. He had a real funny bone for this. However, most of these were just written amongst friends. He didn't write them professionally. As a professional, he was respected at the time. He made a very good living. He just happened to spend it all. He would make a commission and he would spend it very quickly. Towards the end of his life, he had amassed a pretty hefty amount of debt. But in the last 2 years of his life, a lot of that debt began to be paid off because he got better commissions and he wrote more extensively. He was a devout Roman Catholic. So don't be fooled that this man was just some silly, vapid playboy that happened to write tunes. He was a very serious man, a devout Catholic, until the day he died. Not only Catholic, he was a Freemason, a very serious Freemason, practicing Freemason. And his final opera even has a lot of Masonic symbolism included in it. The Magic Flute, written in 1791. So Mozart dies at the age of 35 with a very rather mysterious death to us, but his position in music solidified as one of the greatest composers ever. So please take time to listen to not only his secular work, his symphonies, his operas, but also his religious works. He did write a Requiem, lots of religious pieces as well. I'll close today with one of his religious choral music pieces, Ave Verum Corpus. This was also written in 1791, the year of his passing. Peace to you.